Welcome to the Everyday Heroes podcast by Kofkin Bond Co. Today, we're joined by Joel Bell, a former military officer who served with honor, saved lives, and held families together during some of the toughest missions. After leaving the service, Joel turned his steely resolve and leadership into building a new life in tech. And today, he's working with BotBuilt, an innovative company using AI and robotics to revolutionize how homes are constructed. In this episode, Joel opens up about his military experiences, the bravery, the trauma, and the resilience it took to overcome them, and how those moments continue to fuel his drive at BotBuilt. Join us for an honest, powerful conversation about service, sacrifice, and transformation. Enjoy the podcast.
Joel Bell, formerly Major Joel Bell with the Australian Defence Force. We've known each other for quite some time. You're actually a client of Kofkin Bond, but welcome to Everyday Heroes podcast by Kofkin Bond, and we are talking to you live from North Carolina at the moment. So welcome to our podcast.
Thanks very much, Tony. It's we're starting to see the first signs of fall here. All the trees are starting to turn all different shades of red and orange. So it's a pleasure to be on the podcast.
No, it's and our spring in Melbourne. You've lived in Melbourne quite a few years and training as usual.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, sounds like Melbourne. Don't miss it much at all.
No, I was actually talking to a friend of mine. She's from Nashville, and she was actually saying it's still hot there, and they're still wearing shorts and t-shirt to their first NFL games.
Yep, yeah, it's great. I was at a college game this weekend actually. The Tar Heels playing University of Virginia, and it was hot. I got sunburnt, so it was great.
There you go. So it's I will be down south next year, actually August next year, and including visiting my sister in North Carolina. So we will certainly catch up for a beer.
Yeah, we'll do.
Look forward to it. Now, Joel, we're going to talk about what you're doing actually in North Carolina at the moment, being BotBuilt, which is very fascinating, quite unique part actually, sort of a disruptor in the industry. But your career prior to BotBuilt was, 15 distinguished careers in the military, in the Australian Defence Force. As I did state, you're a retired major. But the last part of your service was quite emotional for you, I do know. You, with a team, you helped lead 4,000 Afghan nationals during the Kabul crisis, the last part of the Afghan war. Can you just give us a bit about your background, your military career, and that last part of your military career as well?
Yeah, sure. I'll start from the beginning. Maybe some of your listeners have kids who are thinking about joining the military, or some listeners are thinking about joining themselves. I think my career is somewhat exemplar of most people in the ADF who joined when I did. So I joined the Defence Force Academy in 2007. I studied civil engineering in the Defence Force Academy, went to the Royal Military College, Duntroon, graduated that in 2011, and then 2010, finished my engineering in 2011, and then posted to my first appointment at the 1st Combat Engineer Regiment in Darwin. I went to the Defence Academy from Mildura, grew up in the dusty northwest, arrived at the Defence Academy pretty wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and not really knowing what I was doing. My world was pretty small up until that point. So the Defence Force Academy I wouldn't change anything. I'd do it again. If my kids thought about joining the military, I'd encourage them to go to the Defence Force Academy. A great experience, especially for a kid like me from the country who didn't have many other opportunities. It was maybe my only opportunity to get a university education, and absolutely loved it. I went from being that kid that didn't fit in a country town to finding my people in the army, and would do it again in a heartbeat. So posted up to Darwin, led some combat engineers for a few years there. Managed to go to East Timor on an exercise, was the highlight of that. We built a school over there, which was fantastic. Went with some US Marines, who are the most aggressive group of people I've ever met, still to this date. They'll get into fights on a construction site, building a primary school. I don't know why Marines are like that, but they are. And then After that, I posted down to Brisbane. I was at a unit called the 6th Engineer Support Regiment, and that's the Army's construction capability. I did a number of appointments there. And that's where I deployed to Afghanistan the first time. So I deployed to Afghanistan in 2016. Combat operations had wrapped up by then. Afghanistan was still a very dangerous place. Our mission was an advisory mission. So I was in the Australian headquarters as what you would call an operations captain, essentially doing the day-to-day running of Australia's operation in the war at that time. We had about 250 personnel in country across different roles. Most of that was in mentoring and advising the Afghans. The bulk of those were in Kabul itself. So I lived at the Kabul airport and spent my days on the radio talking to Australian call signs who were moving around the city, managing that, dealing with any incidents that came up. I made a lot of PowerPoint slides, went to the gym a lot, which for military people there's not much else to do when you're in theatre but go to the gym. And overall, an overwhelmingly negative experience. It was a very dangerous place. There was a lot of violence in the city, and our mandate was to not get involved. We were there to train and advise the Afghans. It was not our job to intervene, and what that amounted to was largely just watching the city tear itself apart. Lots of IEDs, lots of violence, some really troubling stuff around child trafficking and corruption, and yeah, just really awful stuff. And then I sort of had a bird's eye view because I would see all the reports would come in from all the other countries as well, and I would turn that into a report to go back to Australia. So I was seeing what was going on around Afghanistan through these reports, and it wasn't good. Even back in 2016, the war was not going well for the Afghans then.
Joel, can I ask a question there for you? Is knowing you as the person you are, having known you for a number of years now, that must have been really, really difficult not to. You see what's happening, you see the injustice of what's happening. You spoke about the child trafficking, the injustice that can happen to women in these countries as well. It must have been really difficult if you were to actually witness that, not to actually intervene.
Yeah, does stay with me through.
Especially if they know you're not going to intervene.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That stayed with me for a while. It's been a while since I had a nightmare about that, but it really troubled me for a long time, and that's what I think. It's one of the things that if you've never served in the military, it's hard to understand that it's not all guns blazing and bravery and acts of valor. You are ultimately a servant to the Australian government, and as a army officer, your job is to implement government policy. And at that time, our job wasn't to intervene. The Australian government sent me there to train and advise the Afghans. That was our job. It's what we were sent there to do. So my thoughts and feelings about the conduct of the war didn't really matter. I'd been sent there to do a job by the Australian government on behalf of the Australian people. And then that's really where officers earn their money. Again, if you haven't served, it's hard to really understand what an officer does, but motivating. I was in sort of a support leadership role. There was an infantry major there who was leading the company, but I supported him in that. And motivating soldiers in that situation where they're driving around the city, putting themselves at great personal risk, observing all these awful things happen, and they're ordered very clearly to not intervene. That's where officers really earn their money. Because the soldiers want to. The soldiers are like me. They join the military to make a difference. They didn't join the military to just stand by and let things happen. So that's something that stayed with me for quite a long time, and I still think about it, every so often now. What I will say is, when I did get home from that deployment, I was really struggling and had the right people around me, and I guess the insight to seek help. And so I took myself off to a great organisation. It used to be called VVCS. It's now called Open Arms. It's it's a free service for veterans to seek counselling, and also veterans partners. So if anyone listening to this knows of a veteran who maybe isn't doing so well, and it doesn't have to be something to do with a deployment, there's no requirement. The only thing you have to have done to get access to that service is to have served 1 day in the ADF. And so it doesn't have to be related to employment. If you've had a relationship breakdown or whatever it is in your life that you're struggling with, Open Arms is a fantastic service. And so I got back and really was not coping and got no support from my unit on return, uh, but had the foresight to take myself off and speak to someone. When I say I wasn't doing well, I was having suicidal thoughts, was afraid to go outside, was having trouble driving, uh, would take myself off to the bathrooms to cry at lunchtime. So was really in a very bad place. And had a couple of friends who reached out and were there for me at the time. And then Open Arms was a really great source of support for that, and got the help that I needed. So if anyone listening to
Oh,
this is
can I,
struggling,
can I ask you a question on that? As you know, I served 5 years as a director of Carry On. We about 40,000 nights accommodation, homeless veterans, and
yeah,
it's pretty much through that association how we met as well. But I know that I see some of these. I think a lot of the people who use the services of Carry On, though, they haven't necessarily been officers as well. But so I sometimes wonder whether it's a case of that they try to hold it all in, be that real masculine male, and not go and seek support like you did. Because those of I know who did seek support from Open Arms like yourself have nothing but praise for the organisation and everything they do. And Carry On has had quite a long and really strong and positive association with Open Arms as well. If you can get that veteran early and actually get there where they haven't already gone down that path of self-destruction for several years, organisations like Open Arms are magnificent for the veteran and their families and things like that as well. So, do you think that was one of the things that you did have some friends, you did go and seek help, but a lot of these veterans or still serving military don't go and seek that help?
there's certainly there's still a stigma, and I would say most of it is self-inflicted because you join the military. It is by necessity a very masculine organization. You are expected to be tough for good reason, and people don't want to feel like a failure. And the vast majority of people in the military couldn't care less if you go and seek help. In fact, as an officer, if one of my soldiers didn't seek help, I would be more angry about that than if they were struggling with something, right? You want people to be proactive and take care of their own mental health. If I have to step in, then that's a problem. People should be proactive, but it's all this pressure that people put on themselves. And I was certainly like that. I was, a captain in the Royal Australian Engineers. I was an army diver, hyper masculine environment. And I felt like a failure that I wasn't able to cope with that experience that I had in Afghanistan. And, thankfully someone pushed me and I took myself off and booked an appointment. Um, but yeah, a lot of it's self-inflicted. Yeah, if you find yourself in a workplace that gets angry at you seeking mental health support, you're in the wrong workplace. Go and find
Yeah,
somewhere else to
absolutely.
work. And sadly, there are enough people in the military that are still like that. There's
Well,
enough.
there's actually laws against that in the workplace. So we've got now HR team that have just introduced the new rules around workplace bullying and things like that, which have just come out here in Victoria. So it's interesting that in the normal society workplace, you can actually get imprisoned for not encouraging and not helping people who, as an employer. Yet in the
Yeah,
military, it's which is a government organisation, seems to be the opposite
yeah. It's
to some extent.
definitely,
Yeah.
it's just where the rubber meets the road, right? So any officer would say, yeah, if one of my soldiers was struggling or a peer was struggling, I would march them down and get them the help. But then, in those back rooms and with junior leaders who aren't as mature as other people, or some quite senior leaders who've been in the army for 40 years and they just haven't changed. They've very negative views on it. Um, there is still an element that resists and sees it as somewhat of a failure. I would say, and I made a submission to the Royal Commission into veteran suicide about this very thing, that
You did a very
The
moving post on LinkedIn. Yeah, I think it was this week about that as well.
yeah,
Just suicide in
uh,
general. Yeah.
what I was going to say is in my submission to the Royal Commission, talked about the fact that the administrative system, even though it is very well intentioned to make records, make sure people get the help that they need, it stigmatizes it and it effectively punishes people for admitting that they have mental health issues, even minor ones, because then it's on your record, so it'll get brought up at your next medical review, and people don't want to do that. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't want to be that guy that just points out the problems. Yeah, all I would say is if anyone listening to this themselves or they know someone who might be struggling, just go and get help, right? Um, and I would say get professional help. Importantly, it's great
Yeah.
to have a beer with your mate, go and play a round of golf. That's all important. It's critical, but it doesn't make up for getting professional help. If you are ever having suicidal thoughts or thoughts of harming yourself, that is a giant red flag that you need to see a professional. Um, Having a couple of beers is not going to fix that. Take yourself off and speak to a medical professional. Um,
Yeah.
can't recommend that enough. But yeah, so go back from Afghanistan, didn't do very well with that. I got
Yeah.
posted to a place called the Warrant Officer Training Academy at Canungra. I did SAS selection a couple of times there. Didn't do very well at that. Mostly was because I hadn't dealt with all my mental health issues and my emotional stress that was still lingering from Afghanistan. Foolishly, I thought that doing more push-ups would fix my mental health. And when you're training for selection, you do a lot of push-ups, so you don't have much room for mental health to be an issue. And then I got to selection. I was invited to attend, which was a real privilege. Got to the second day and withdrew myself because I had a massive panic attack, essentially. And again, went and saw a psych, and they said, "Well, Joel, there's a very obvious reason that you had a panic attack because you haven't dealt with any of this trauma that you've got." And so again, got the help for that. And you know, I would have loved to have served in the SASR, but the silver lining was that I got the help that I needed to deal with that trauma that was lingering. Um, Following that, I posted to a place called Capital Facilities and Infrastructure. So when you're an Army engineer, you very quickly, and you have an engineering degree, you very quickly go from combat to construction. I posted to Capital Facilities Branch, which is the group that manages all of the very large infrastructure projects in the Army. So I think I had something like $200 million worth of infrastructure projects that I was responsible for just as one person. And I'd fly around. Most of my projects were down in the southeast, so Victoria and southern New South Wales. Go and meet with the contractors and consultants who were running that, make sure the project stayed on track, attend all the meetings. And that was a great job. It really opened my eye to what money actually meant. And that's the job that made me not afraid of big numbers. $5 million is a lot of money to anyone, but $5 million on an infrastructure project is a drop in the ocean. And so it was a really great experience for me to see just how big money moves and to understand that. Made me much more mature when it came to business. And then my final posting was to the best job that I had in the Army, which was as a major at the 19th Chief Engineer Works in Sydney. It's a quite storied unit, very famous for the work that they did in Papua New Guinea. All the civil engineers in the Army want to go there, so it was a real privilege to be a major there and command a subunit. What that looked like was I had a team of about 12 construction experts. So I had a few captains who were civil engineers, some senior soldiers who were and I sent them around the country and around the world delivering infrastructure projects. Very privileged job, had very little oversight, so the ultimate freedom. Our particular projects we did a lot of work for COVID, so that was in 2020, which feels like an eternity ago now that COVID happened. Maybe not for you guys in
No,
Melbourne.
you actually do have it at the moment.
Yeah. This is like my 6th time having COVID, so
Okay.
I go collect them all the variants.
Yeah.
We did some support work for the New South Wales government. We're based in Sydney. We did a lot of work on emergency services for them. So How do we turn a school hall into an emergency hospital? How do we turn a hotel into a hospital? How do we set up an emergency ward in a rural area, an emergency morgue, sorry, in a rural area? What does a mass grave look like? How would we deal with thousands of bodies if that were to happen? So I never thought in my army career I'd be planning a mass grave in suburban Sydney. So that was a unique job, and no one else really had any expertise in that. And so we just did some preliminary designs for that. So if the worst happened, what would we do? Because I would have asked the army to assist with that. And that was some of the most rewarding work that I did in the army, working on that stuff, because everyone else was locked up at home and I got to work on the problem. So it was great. And my team did some really positive work on that. And I think the New South Wales government was very appreciative of us lending a hand. It also meant that I could travel around, flash my army ID and drove wherever I wanted. So it was great while everyone else was locked up. And then that's when I deployed to the Middle East for the second time. The story I like to tell is that the day I flew to the Middle East in 2021, I was the only passenger to fly in and out of Australia that day. If you looked at the flight radar, my aircraft was the only aircraft and we had one passenger. I flew out of Sydney International and there was more police than there were airline staff or passengers. I was the only passenger that day, flew out of Sydney International, hopped through Darwin and then over to Dubai on my own Airbus jet with six air hostesses all to myself. So
I hope you decided to sit up the pointy end of the plane.
yeah, 1A, seat 1A, of course.
There you go. Yep.
So yeah, fun little anecdote. And then the position I was in the Middle East was the chief engineer. So I was responsible for all of the ADF's infrastructure across the Middle East, which spread at that time from Sudan all the way to Syria. We owned infrastructure in southern Israel, in Egypt, Syria, Sudan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Qatar, Dubai, of course, or the UAE, Bahrain. And my team's job for that 9 months was essentially to close all of that. So the war in the Middle East was over for Australia. We'd been there for something like 30 years in one form or another since Gulf War I. And we needed to get rid of all the infrastructure. So we got rid of thousands and thousands of pieces of infrastructure, which there actually is not much policy on how to dispose of infrastructure or get rid of it. So we had to come up with some creative solutions. We sold a couple of things for $1, found an Iraqi and gave him $1. So we could say that we sold it. We gave him $1 so he could give it back to us and pretend a transaction had occurred, just to keep the bean counters happy. We abandoned some stuff, just drilled a hole through the lock and walked away from some things. A couple of things got burnt. A lot of it we just abandoned, wrote off, gifted it to the Americans or the British. Whoever would take it, essentially, we'd give it away. So it was a fascinating job. My team did a whole lot of work to achieve that. And then Australia maintains a big base in the Middle East, just outside of Dubai, called Al Minhad. And a lot of that got shut down as well. And so my team planned that. That's a quite big facility. It can hold something like 4,000 people. Everyone who went to the Middle East spent time in Al Minhad. Everyone has different memories of it. But my team was the one who planned the closure of it. We closed a little bit, and then the follow-on team actually got to demolish it all. So it's much smaller than people would remember after my team was there. And then at the back end of that was when we did the evacuation from Kabul, which was certainly the biggest thing that I did in my career. Quite profound to be a part of. For a few weeks there, what I was doing was at the center of the world. Everyone was watching. Unique experience. I came into that with some very bad memories, as I talked about from my first deployment to the Middle East. I'd been carrying around what felt like a debt, because as you described, watching all of those things occur when I was in Afghanistan in 2016 and feeling quite helpless and powerless to do anything, felt like I owed a debt to the people of Afghanistan for not intervening, for not doing anything. And the evacuation felt like repaying that debt. I probably didn't realize that until the end of it, but spoke to a couple of people over there, and that's what it was. Is It's what drove us so hard. Is we all saw what was happening. We knew what was going to happen, and if you even follow the news a little bit, you'll see what's going on in Afghanistan. And we all knew that was going to happen. And so most of the, well, all of them actually, they were either Australian citizens and their immediate families, so they deserved a trip out of Afghanistan. They were Australians just like you and me. Um, and then those that had assisted us in the war, so they'd earn a spot. They put themselves in harm's way by working for Australia during the war, and so they earn a spot on one of those planes with their family, and it was quite a profound thing to be a part of. My specific role in that was I was based in Dubai for that at Al Minhad, and I led the construction of the camp to house these people as they came out of Afghanistan with an excellent team. I had some fantastic guys, a great guy by the name of Callum Johnson. He's out of the army now as well, working in Brisbane. Heroic stuff that they pulled off. Tom Vallis, who's still in the army. Just the work ethic of these guys. Another Air Force sergeant, plumber, Pete Jenkins. Well, these guys they didn't sleep for 4 days to get this thing built. Kicked doors in, just did what they had to do to get it done, because we knew that it had to happen in order for the evacuation to continue. The conditions were quite extreme, so something like 52 to 54 degrees outside in the sun, just baking constantly. We had pretty much a greenfield site. We just had some spare land on the base. We had a couple of toilet blocks that were in poor condition, and then a mess hall that wasn't in great condition either. And we managed to turn that into a camp that I think at the peak housed about 3,000 Afghan civilians. And yeah, those guys didn't sleep for about 4 days to get that done, which is one of the proudest moments in my military career. Definitely the proudest thing that I was a part of. And yeah, seeing those kids come off the plane was a pretty emotional moment. Yeah.
I did see a comment when putting together some questions from this. Seeing the smile on the kid's face, yeah, it was like they knew they were safe when they landed. I think it was a comment that you had made, but one of the interviews, but just seeing these children smile, just basically, that was one of the greatest things that you could see.
Yeah, it was. So I'll tell a story and I'll probably cry. So I know you're not going to edit it out, but it was emotional. So the first plane that made it out, I had a good friend who had gone in as part of the first plane, and they sent back the first plane with maybe like 20 people on it. It was just, they were the only Australians they'd managed to find, because it was just a crush. And trying to find people to send back was really, really difficult. And so they managed to find 20 Australians, and the plane landed late. It was like 2 a.m. in Dubai. And we'd all been working really hard to get this camp up and running and set everything up and give them some semblance of a safe place to be before we could get them back to Australia. And they all walked off, and then there was a family that was, sorry, mate.
And apologize.
There was a family that was taking quite a while to get off the plane, and I thought, what's going on? And we were sort of standing back just watching, and the mother walked off, and she was carrying a 3-week-old infant, and I just remember thinking that little girl, she was 3 weeks old, and as a team, we'd managed to rescue her from what would have obviously been a terrible life in Afghanistan. And yeah, we just knew at that point that what we were doing, we we knew at that point, and I spoke to my team, that what we were doing from that point on was going to be very important. And so that really, it really motivated everyone that was there. You couldn't see that and not feel exactly that way. And then, yeah, it went on for about, I think it was something like 16 days after that. And we managed to evacuate something like 4,500 people. We had 6 children born in my camp. Um, and yeah, it was a pretty emotional time, a lot of it. A couple of people coming out with injuries, and there was this one guy. I remember he came with like 14 teenage girls, and I don't know how he managed to do that. Is this, it was just some crazy stuff. Like, but yeah, that first little girl, I still think about that.
It's interesting, Joel, as you told that deeply emotional story, but it's that 3-week-old little girl is probably now getting ready for preps next year here in Australia somewhere, and probably has an Australian accent and a smile from ear to ear, and she's living a life that if you didn't get her family out, she would not have a life. She would not be able to start that education in Kabul. So you have a look at all those 14 teenage girls. They're probably, now finishing year 12. They've got a life. And I say that genuinely from my heart. We did an interview a couple of months ago with a young lady by the name of Sarah Murdoch. Now, Sarah Murdoch is her married name, but Sarah's background is her father had to quickly, he was on Saddam's, he was a chemical engineer, and Saddam decided that he wanted all that family's wealth. And basically he was put on Saddam's death list. And in the space of 24 hours, he had to get his family together and evacuate, and they held hostage for 3 months in Kazakhstan. She was 12 years old. Now, you have a look at her today. She's just won National Pharmacist of the Year. She's been nominated the International Pharmacist of the Year. All her siblings are in the medical profession, including herself. Very successful family here in Australia. They've actually added so much to Australia. They ended up going out to Albury to start with. So all that work, I have a look at that family and other families that I know as well from some of the work we've done with SSI. Those families here in Australia today, I think the people like Sarah, like Mazia Razi, people like that. She's an Afghan. She came here as an Afghan refugee as well. They're the people who she's just qualified as a lawyer. So those people that were on those planes, the ones that I've met, have all had wonderful lives because of what you and your team have done. So that's a heartfelt from me in return. This isn't just me listening to the story. It's actually seeing the benefactors of all the work that you and your team have done, which is amazing.
Yeah, and we talked about that. It's pretty easy to ask someone to stay up for a few days when they know what they're doing, when you have a real purpose like that. And it was a whole team effort. There was no one at that base or anyone involved who wasn't giving 110% just to evacuate as many as we could. And it was, the most difficult, but the most rewarding thing that I've done to date. But yeah, you see even now, just extremely emotional stuff. You'd see these whole families just carrying all their worldly belongings in a tiny little bag and running for their life because their dad was a translator for the Australians during the war, and he knew that he was on a list. There was a number of women that would arrive and they would say, "Oh, my husband just got stopped by the Taliban, but he'll come on the next flight, right?" And we'd go, "Yeah, sure, he'll come on the next flight, but we knew that he was never coming. And there was a number of guys where, and I didn't understand it to begin with, where the husband would come first, and then the wife and kids would follow. But to them, they're clearing the way. They're making sure it's safe, and then the family will follow. I wouldn't do it that way. It's not how our culture would deal with that. But they would come, and then there'd be this desperate scramble to get their wife and kids on the next flight, and just some of the desperation on these people's faces, like real desperation. And unless you've seen someone in that situation, it's hard to comprehend. Um, it, it's made me be very intolerant of people's complaints in
Yes.
Australia and in America. So,
Yes, very
um,
much so. Very
but
much
yeah,
so.
overwhelmingly, just it took me a while to process that. Um, it took me a while to get over that, a couple of years really to get over that. I returned from that and really struggled to be around children. Would just get very emotional around kids for a long time after that. Again, Open Arms was there um, to give some really great support. And yeah, and I was already deciding. I'd already decided that I was going to leave the army after that deployment. I was applying for business schools while I was in the Middle East, and I did that and went, yep, my time in the army is done. I've done enough, and it felt like it was an honor to be a part of, and it felt like a worthy end to a career. I didn't want to be in the army anymore. I didn't have any desire to go on to become a general or anything like that. Probably not well suited for that. Too belligerent to be a general. But it definitely confirmed my decision that my time in the army was coming to a rapid end. So I got home, discharged papers in, and then took some leave. And then here I am now, essentially,
Well,
with a few steps in between.
you did your exchange, and you got your MBA at North Carolina University, NCU, where actually my oldest niece actually went to, studied law there, qualified a
Right.
couple of years ago, from law. She's now over in the UK. But you've shared very emotional personal experiences there, and you know, let's talk about BotBuilt, what you're doing in North Carolina at the moment, and it's technology, robotics, and AI driven in the construction industry. But how do you think those personal experiences with, housing construction, whether it be, during the COVID era, whether it be what you guys did in Dubai, how do you think that's actually influenced your vision for BotBuilt? And can you give us that bit of a background for anyone who's unfamiliar with what BotBuilt is, and just give us that bit of background of how you are a disruptor and how you guys are changing or looking at definitely changing a very old school industry?
Yeah, so I'm not a founder. Certainly won't take credit for that. The guys would hate me to do that. But I was brought into BotBuild about 18 months ago now, almost 18 months, when uh, they wanted to start a new business unit. So classic startup story. They developed a product which we'll go into a little bit later for themselves, and they realized that hey, other people would pay for this. This is useful information, and so now looking for someone like me with a construction background and some business experience or a business degree. Right at the time, I was looking to move to the US and find a job here. My background is deeply construction. So my granddad's an electrician, my uncle's an electrician, my dad's a master carpenter. He's been a carpenter his entire life now. He used to run a wall frame and roof truss plant for Dalsons in Mildura. And so I spent my entire childhood around that, helping dad on site. School holidays would be on site, handing him studs and standing up walls and um, get an icy pole for your day's hard work on the way home. Uh, and so I've been around that a long time. And then my time in the military gave me more experience in construction. I got an engineering degree, built all sorts of things around the world. And so it's definitely the lane that I was in. And then I did my business degree and wanted to start my own business, and I wanted to be in tech, but didn't really have the pedigree to do that. and didn't really know enough about business. So decided that the path to do that, and a couple of mentors advised me to find work in a startup. So I literally found BotBuilt on LinkedIn. So not to advertise for LinkedIn, but I was searching for businesses in North Carolina. North Carolina sort of goes under the radar as a bit of a tech hub. The 3 universities here. Sorry, I'm going to put my dog outside, mate. He's snuck in. So you go, buddy. North Carolina is sort of an undercover tech hub. Everyone knows about Silicon Valley, but because of the 3 universities that are here, UNC, North Carolina State, and Duke, there's a lot of tech talent in North Carolina and a lot of tech startups here. So Google is building their first hub outside of California, here just down the road in North Carolina. They're manufacturing EV batteries here in North Carolina. They're building supersonic passenger jets. So as you would well know, and anyone who's spent time in the US, just the scale and scope of industry here is on a whole nother level to what we see in Australia. And so I found BotBuilt. I messaged one of the founders.
So, John, my
Yeah.
sister Michelle, she actually calls Raleigh, Carolina, the home of IBM widows. So it's that
Yeah.
they all go over there because of IBM, and they all end up the IBM divorcees or the IBM widows, as she called it.
Yeah, that's probably pretty accurate.
Yeah.
There's huge companies here like Red Hat, SAS. Some very big tech companies that are based out of here.
Yeah.
There's a big gaming company. I can't remember what their name is, but yeah. Anyway, I found Barrett, the CTO, on LinkedIn, sent him a message. We had a call. Serendipitous almost, right? Like you've got to go and find the door, and then when the door opens, you actually have to walk through it. So had a call with Barrett, explained my background, said I was looking to move back here because I'd met my wonderful partner, Courtney, who's from North Carolina. We met at a Halloween party while I was studying. Knew I wanted to come back and I wanted to be in a tech startup. So my background matched extremely well with what BotBuilt was looking for at that time, which I would say, if anyone listening to this is thinking about a change, like you've just got to take the first step, reach out, send that LinkedIn message, send an email. It's the only way to do it. Like, don't bother applying to job ads. Use your network, get introduced to people, find the opportunity, because someone will be looking for you. And if they're posting an ad, that's their last resort. They don't want to go through 100 applications. Use your network.
You've actually
and then,
just described perfectly what last week's podcast guest said, Peter Turin. It's easy to do, easy not to do. It's your choice.
Yeah.
Yes, and you just did it.
Yeah.
No one's going to abuse you for asking or making a call, are they?
No, exactly. And what's the worst thing they're going to do? Not accept your LinkedIn connection application? Like, move on. Find the next person.
Yeah.
And so, you just got to get out there and do it. There's nothing stopping you.
Yeah.
The thing that I really liked about BotBuilt was that they were tackling a legacy industry. So I spent enough time in construction to be very frustrated with the construction industry, the culture of it, the way things are done, all the construction methods. So they were trying to disrupt something, and it suited me well. I like ideas like that. I was very unpopular with senior officers in the Army because I love to argue and propose new things and question things. And I thought, great, here's a startup that's doing exactly that for construction. So the other founders are like that as well. So sometimes we have some big arguments, but that makes better at diffusing our arguments, but things still go pretty well.
So tell us a bit about BotBuilt. Yes, for the listeners, especially who some of our listeners are in construction in some form or another. So tell us a bit about BotBuilt.
Yeah, so BotBuilt was founded by the guys, so Brent, Barrett, and Colin. Colin's no longer with the business, so Brent and Barrett. It's founded 5 years ago now. The backstory is that Colin and Brent were both studying PhDs here at Duke. Barrett is a roboticist. He was a NASA scientist, and he worked at Boston Dynamics, a very famous robotics lab, before he started his PhD. His PhD was in motion planning, which I'll explain a little bit later. But essentially, it's having robots think for themselves. They plan their own movements, which is we're at the cutting edge of that. Most of the other robotic systems are very short-sighted. They can do a few short-sighted tasks. They're not planning 100 steps ahead, which is what Barrett's PhD was on. And then Colin was studying housing policy. They bonded over the PhD. Brent was US Special Operations for a long time. He was injured in Iraq and had a medical discharge from the US military. He is related to Barrett. He's Barrett's wife's cousin, something like that. So they all knew each other. They got together and started BotBuilt. Barrett says that he was remodeling a house and realized just how annoying that process was and thought there has to be a way to make this better with robots, and then also saw the expense. So trades in the US are not as expensive as trades in Australia, but still very expensive. And being a guy who'd programmed humanoid robots for NASA, he went, there's probably something that we can do here to make housing more affordable. And so they started BotBuilt. What they landed on was framing makes up the largest single cost item in a house for both materials and labor. In the US, it's something like 25% of the total cost of building a house is just the timber framing. Construction methods in Australia and the US are very similar. There are some differences, but essentially the same construction methods. And so using robots to make prefabricated wall frames and roof trusses makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of labor that goes into those. And so if you can make that labor much more productive and produce more frames with less people, you can have that labor on site. You get a net reduction in the price, in the cost of a house. Price is a different question because the builder still has to bring their prices down, but certainly the cost of building it comes down significantly. And so what it looks like is the robots you can see here. So I put this picture up. It's been in the background, so we can talk about that. So what you see here are automotive robots. So we buy them secondhand, and we can talk about that at length. But we buy automotive robots. We could buy brand new ones. It's all the same. We give them an AI brain, and then we process building plans using AI to tell the robots what to build. So the first step is you can just send me a PDF. You could send me a Revit file or a CAD file. It doesn't really matter to us. We have an AI that will read that file. It'll read the PDF, pick out all the dimensions, tell us where all the doors and windows need to go. And it'll build that whole house framing pack completely digitally. So when I give this pitch to potential customers, I'll zoom in on the 3D thing and say, look, we had to model every single nail because the robots don't know where the nails go. We have to tell them where each nail has to go. And so we have an AI product that will do that. Model every nail, every lintel, every stud, every noggin, the whole thing. And we send that to the robots. And then the software that is in these robots plans all of those movements on their own. And that is quite a profound invention. So there's been a few of our competitors that have gone broke. Part of the reason is they were never able to solve that. So people who were doing this, because there's other companies who were using robots to build wall frames, they had to hard code every single movement. Whereas us, we send the design of the house to the robot and it plans its own movements. So we can do a different house every single time. Rather than if you're hard coding, then there's a lot of design cost in that. So you might say, I'll only do this house if I can repeat it 30 times because you have to spread that cost over all of those 30 houses. Our design cost is something like $50. Excuse me, something like $50. And it means that we can do a different house every single time. So rather than having to repeat the houses, and you see it in Australia, I get enough Instagram posts about these suburbs that are just cookie cutter suburbs. They all look the same. Why? Because you have to spread costs across that and you get economies of scale. With this,
I actually call it Legoland, some of those suburbs.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we've got to do something to make housing affordable, but I'm not sure they're a nice suburb to live in. Whereas with a system like this, for the same cost, you can get customization in every single house. So you don't need that cookie cutter approach. You don't need that standardization as much. The other thing we do with that data, so we'll read the plan, send the data to the robots, and build the house. But the reason I was brought into the company was they realized that that data also calculates all of the quantities that you need to build the house. And so what you essentially get is an AI quantity surveyor. Because we've read the plan, we now know all the dimensions in the house. So we can tell you every stud, every piece of trim, every door, every window, every lock, all the plaster, all the roofing material. We can tell you every single item that you need to actually build that house. And that's what I manage largely. I'm the director of business development, but what I also do is manage the AI product that does the quantity surveying role. And so we have a business model where people send us plans, we process it with AI, we send it back, we charge them a fee, and we make healthy margins on it. It's a great business, and a good example of using AI to do work that is quite simple. None of it's difficult math, but there's a lot of very simple calculations and a lot of opportunities to get it wrong. And those somewhat small mistakes can have very big consequences on a construction project. So if you get one thing wrong, that could be your profit margin on the whole job. And margins are thin. Construction's a tough industry. Very thin margins.
It's actually why so many construction companies here in Australia were going out of business. We're talking big ones, like say ProBuilt, not BotBuilt, obviously, but ProBuilt here in Australia, one of the largest. I think it's the third largest construction company, went out of business 3 years ago. Couldn't finish some of the C-bus sites that they had, such as big apartments, and just left them half built. And we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of projects just walked out. So seems to be very thin margins, and and they're on set contracts, and if the cost of supplies go up, it's a lot of trouble. How much does what you guys are doing potentially lower the cost, as a percentage base, lower the cost of, say, a house build? Say I was going to build your normal house, I've got my block of land in Kew and I'm going to build my house on it, and that normal house would cost $1 million to build, let's say. What would say a percentage reduction be by you guys coming in and doing what you do, if you were here in Australia, that is, and let's assume there's no unionized crap going at you and all the rest of it that we know happens in the building industry here. Let's just talk about let's talk about if I was in North Carolina.
Yeah, well, you can't unionize a robot. That's one of the benefits. You can't, not yet.
Yeah.
They do look like they have a personality sometimes, but they're not yet able to unionize. We keep them disconnected from the internet so they can't talk to each other. But we think we can cut 10% out of the cost of building a house.
That's substantial.
Yeah, and most of that is in labor. You get a significant saving in materials. Any of the waste occurs in the factory. We can optimize for material use. We have some extremely bright PhDs, because what we can say is we might not be able to pay you as much, but you don't have to go and build weapons. You can come and build houses for people, because that's where a lot of the tech people get sucked into in the US, the very high-paying jobs. You can come work for us and build homes for people rather than weapons. And so they can program the software in here. It'll optimize for materials, so you minimize waste. It'll even do very interesting things where we can optimize for price. So businesses will give us their pricing list, and we can have the AI look at that and choose what is actually the cheapest material to do it. So if, say, the building calls for a 10-foot stud, but for whatever reason that week 14-foot studs are cheaper, it will select the 14-foot studs. So we're optimizing for a few different things. Or we can optimize for time, minimize robot time, so minimize cuts, all these sorts of things. So it saves a lot of labor, and then on site it goes up much faster. The interesting thing here in the US is that they stick build something like 90% of the homes in this country, whereas in Australia it would be the opposite. They would use prefabricated wall frames for about 90%, and that's what my dad did for a long time. Building prefabricated wall frames, you ship them to site, stand them up. Here in the US, wall frames will take what would be, say, a 7-day build for a 2-story, 4-bedroom house here in the US, which is pretty standard here. They do love big houses in America. And big intricate roofs. It's almost like they're competing with their neighbor about who can have the fanciest, most complicated roof, which makes it very hard to calculate. But we get there. That would take typically 2 stories, 4 bedrooms would take typically 7 days to stick frame here in the US. And it's almost exclusively done with immigrant labor. I'm not sure I've seen a white guy on a building site the whole time I've been in the US. It's all extremely hardworking Hispanic labor. Great guys. These guys are awesome. They love a beer, they're hilarious, and they work hard. Rain, hail, or shine, it could be 42 degrees and humid outside. These guys are working. I really love those Hispanic guys. They're excellent. We should actually import them to Australia. They get kicked out of the US. We should bring more of them to Australia. Um, but
That would, disrupt the building industry in Australia. You wouldn't want that now, would you?
yeah. People
Yeah.
that work hard for a reasonable wage would
Mm.
be unheard of, and the work's quality as well. They produce good
Yeah.
work. Here it's immigrant labor. Lumber is cheaper than Australia, and they stick build everything. So one of the benefits we give is we go from a 7-day build to a 2-day build, so you can close out your construction loan earlier, which saves a lot of money. It's things like waste. So on that build, they typically have 3 dumpsters worth of waste at $1,500 per dumpster. You from 3 to 1, so $3,000 saving. You start to add all of these things up, that looks like 10% saving on the cost of a house. And then it's a question of, well, does the builder pass that on to the homeowner, or does the builder keep that as margin? And both are correct. Builders need to remain sustainable or they go broke. The homeowner needs to get a saving, and we're not involved in that. Our customer is the builder. What they choose to do with that margin is up to them. They can come down in price and compete, win some more customers, or they can keep the margin and buy the kids a nicer Christmas. Or be solvent. That's the truth, right?
Yeah.
So it's a pretty profound capability, and we're getting good traction with it. So we've built something like 40 houses here in North Carolina. So there are 40 families living in BotBuilt houses. It's a higher quality than they would get with it being stick built. You get robotic precision in the factory. It's people love that every nail is in exactly the right place. There's no misses. There's no nails sticking out. Every nail is perfect. So
Joel, do you still use you've brought AI to a industrial physical labor, traditional old school physical labor industry. Now, I just thought it was my industry or lawyers or accountants that were a threat with AI, but you've actually brought it to a manual labor industry. And those Hispanic workers that you're talking about, are their jobs at risk with what you're doing and designing, or is there opportunities here?
Yeah, it is one of the challenges that we've had is those framing contractors are not willing to negotiate on price because they're fearful that we're going to steal their jobs. If you look at it from a business perspective, they can come down a bit in price and do more volume. There's a huge shortage of homes here in America, anywhere between 1.5 and 3 million homes shortage, depending on which numbers you read. They're not going to stop building houses. They're not going to run out of houses to build. But it's a challenge to say to these guys, because they also don't have any incentive to come down in price. They say, well, who are you? You're this small startup. Why should I come down in price for you? And trying to get them to say, well, yeah, I'll come down in price and win more work. But because it's taking me 2 days instead of 7, I can now do 3 times as many houses. So I make more money net. That's been a challenge to convince people to do that. And I think that's one of the challenges across the industry. For the quantity surveying product that I manage, every time I show it to a business, they send it to their estimating team, and their estimating team go, no, it's terrible. It's not going to work. Cynically, I think a large part of it is they're fearful for their job. And then it's my job to say, look, it's not going to replace you because we can't do everything, and it probably won't do everything because you still need to talk to the customer. You need to understand any changes they have. A good example is windows. People are always changing their windows. And if you're not talking to the customer and understanding that, it's often not drawn on the plan. The window supplier is not drawn on the plan. It just says this size window. And then they all have different specifications for how the frame needs to be built around the window. There's been probably 4 houses we've built where we had to go and replace every window because we didn't know that they'd changed suppliers and it had different requirement. But the estimators are still very fearful. I sent a plan to a company this week. We do, and the guy came back and he said, "This is terrible. There's 15 items that they've missed." Now there's 600 items on that list, and instead of saying this is awesome, they got 585 of them correct. There's a few we could tweak. It's the negative view. Oh, they screwed up 15 items.
Yeah, you still need to employ me. These guys are not going to be able to do it. Yeah.
Exactly. And instead of going, oh, wow, this could make my job so much faster, and I could spend less time counting the number of studs or calculating what size lintel I need to put in, instead of having that view, it's a fear. And a lot of what I do is convincing people that even the CEOs, because they don't want to fire these people. They've had them in their business for 10, 15, 20 years. Maybe their dad even employed them a lot of the time. They go, well, I don't want to fire my estimating team. I said, well, I didn't say that. You don't have to fire your estimating team, and I wouldn't, because you still need them. There's going to be changes and things that you need to do, but now they can quote 5 times as many bids because instead of them having that calculator and a spreadsheet and using legacy software, you can send it to us. We'll send it back. They can check the work. You can do more. You can grow the business without increasing headcount. And then the kicker is always that there's a critical shortage. The next question I ask them is, well, are you having trouble recruiting quantity surveyors or estimators, or are you having trouble recruiting framing labor? And of course they are. I say, well, here's the solution. You can't find people across construction trades in Australia. They'll say there's a shortage of skilled workers. Okay, well, let's supplement the existing workforce with robotics. It makes total sense. You need to. They had the productivity roundtable. I guarantee they didn't talk once about robotics. Bring in robots.
They talk much about anything, to be brutally honest on that. So, yeah.
Yeah, bring in robots to enhance the human labor. The people can be more productive when you team them.
But Joel, we're actually talking about the housing crisis. It doesn't matter whether you're in Australia, the US, the UK. Everyone's talking about a housing crisis. We're talking about the shortage of skilled labourers here in Australia as well. But but at the same time, I don't know whether the building industry actually wants to actually bring in more skilled migrants, because they can actually just bump up the wages and bump up the union fees of the existing as a result. Because if there's a shortage there, you can bump up your asking price for contractors, etc. But looking at this housing crisis that we're all facing, but how scalable is the solution of what you guys have done in BotBuilt? I mean, can it be done across all different regions, bearing in mind different laws and red tape and everything you have to go through? But I mean, how scalable is this business? Because it sounds unbelievably exciting.
That's one of the great things is none of what we're using here, other than the software and the tools. So you might be able to see here in this picture. It might be a bit blurry, but the tool on the end of the robot that's painted to us. So the tool that will cut and nail the lumber, but we can just produce more of them. That's easy. But the rest of it, nothing we're doing here is really earth-shattering other than the software. So these robots you can buy anywhere. They're an ABB robot. They build cars all over the world. You can buy an ABB robot in Australia. You can get technicians anywhere. They're like the Komatsu of robots. Everywhere in the world you can find them and service them and get parts. We use pneumatic air guns. We use normal saw blades. It's not anything particularly bespoke. And that's been from the start, is don't build this high-end, high-tech thing that is so bespoke no one can use it and no one can service it. It has to be usable by the average guy. So the guy that runs this factory, one of the guys that runs it, is a 15-year-old kid. And Tim's great. Tim's bright, but Tim's no genius. Tim wants to be a metal fabricator when he grows up. We love him, but the point I'm trying to make is you don't need a PhD to run this stuff. It's been designed with that flexibility in mind. So you can get the parts anywhere. You can train anyone to do it. The design is AI powered. We use an offshore team. We're very open about that. We process it through the AI, and we use an offshore team in the Philippines to check the work. We hire Filipino engineers because they're excellent, and they're cheaper. Labor is cheaper in the Philippines. They check the work, and then it gets sent to the robots. So you don't need particularly skilled labor. You can get the parts anywhere. The facilities don't need anything special. These run on 110-volt power. They don't draw much power. They just have an air compressor in the back that runs the nail guns. You need a 40-foot by 40-foot square and 12-foot high ceilings, and that's about it. You don't even need walls, so you don't need climate control. These robots are that tough. And so if you have a facility, if you have a warehouse, you can build houses in it. You don't need anything special. We actually just made our first robot sale, which is our big news, up in Richmond, so just north of North Carolina here. So we just put them on the back of our trailer and drove the robots up there. And they run on tracks. You might be able to see just here.
Yep.
They just run on tracks. You just bolt the tracks to the concrete, and then they work. There's nothing all that difficult to do this. We see this being in every state in the US. That's sort of the 5-year target, having a BotBuilt factory in every state in the US. We're talking to big manufacturers here already about rolling that out. And like that's a big industry. Like there are home builders here that build 200,000 homes a year. And there are truss plants that produce, like 100,000 sets of trusses a year from one plant in America. So it's a completely different scale. And so we see this being in every state in America. We've been talking to some manufacturers in Australia, early talks. They're very interested. And that's where I see the opportunity, right? Like if you want to be a unionized workforce and have high prices, all it takes is someone to come in with robots. You don't want to get into a price war with robots because that's something that you're never going to win. When they're doing it cheaper, higher quality, faster, they're more reliable. They don't go on strike. They don't need a lunch break. They don't get drunk on Thursday and not come in on Friday. They don't quit. They don't get injured. It's if you want to beat the market, embracing robotics is a quick path to winning a lot of market share, and that's a lot of the interest we get here. We talk to a lot of manufacturers.
What's interesting is we've spoken previously off air as well, but every time, it doesn't matter whether it was the Industrial Revolution, Henry Ford coming out with, in some way, the first form of robotics in respect to just the, getting the T model Fords out so quickly. It used to take like 7 days to put a car together before he invented, the whole process. And what that did, of course, was it made cars affordable and accessible
Exactly.
to the general public. And I told you earlier, and I can't remember. I have to look it up. The gentleman who quoted it with one of the very wealthy families, but he said, remember him saying one day he can envisage New York having 20 cars, but nothing was ever going to, overtake the horse and cart. But every time there is this new, and it doesn't matter whether it's Industrial Revolution or the big building phase that happened, say in the US, and where a lot of the US wealth came from after World War II, where it had the ability to loan money to European countries through bonds, etc. Then, of course, you've had the technology revolution, and even with the internet as an example, so the tech boom that has occurred. And now with AI, every time this has occurred, and I'm old enough to have been part of the tech boom and now the AI revolution, but every time there has been part of this, people have said this is the end of jobs, this is the end of humanity. It's whereas what has happened is everything has flourished as a result. So, it's, I don't know whether you met Shay in our office, but Shay, as part of his mandate with his new role, is don't think of us as a financial services company. Think of us as a tech company that specializes in financial services. So everything in here has to be digital, automated, recurring, evergreen, scalable. So I don't see, I don't necessarily see our roles as custodians of people's wealth and knowledge at risk if we actually keep up with it and embrace what is happening. So what you're doing is a game changer for the construction industry, something that countries are yelling out for and requiring. But it's interesting that people will see it as a threat. Whereas in 5 years' time, it could actually be a revolution where everyone now has good, affordable housing and a roof over their head.
Yeah, and it starts to open interesting questions. So I spoke to a forum of architects recently, and I said to them, I said, when you remove human labor from the prefabrication process, how can we build houses differently? Because a lot of the constraints are actually on human labor because it's expensive, so you might not do certain things, and there's limitations on what a human can do. A robot can do many different things.
Yeah.
So how do we build differently? And then how does that change the construction process? I'm not smart enough to figure that out. I'm not an architect. I have some ideas about it, but it's this step change now that AI can come into the physical domain, which is really one of the profound things about BotBuilt is, yeah, we have an AI product, we have robotics, but we're taking AI and making it a physical product. It picks up lumber and nails it, and we build houses with it. What does that look like? What is that car versus horse and cart analogy? Um, my dad tells a great story where he did his apprenticeship with no power tools. So he learned everything, mortise and tenon, hand drills, the whole lot. And then he talks about buying his first ever power drill. And, all the old guys are like, that stupid thing. No one's ever going to use them. They're no good, blah, blah, blah. And he said, it wasn't great. It was like a 3-volt drill or something crazy.
Yeah.
Um, all the old fellows like, you never use that. What do you want that thing for? Now look where we are. And so what's that analogy? Like we're just at the start. We're at the
Joel,
start of that curve. So
I'm so old that I remember my father having an abacus in his briefcase. So and he spent an entire week's wage on one of the first ever calculators that they now give away in show bags.
yeah, right.
So it's
There you go.
that it's just part of companies' merch nowadays,
Yeah,
that cost, 5 cents or something like that. So it's interesting how he went from, and I thought the abacus was a toy. He used to have it as a toy in his office, but
yeah,
he went from having the abacus to this amazing invention called a calculator. So so yeah, what your father's saying is exactly the same. It's the drill was created a few less calluses on his hand as a result.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another benefit we don't need to go into in detail, but it just makes everything safer. If you ever anyone who's ever been into a truss plant wouldn't describe it as a fun, safe place to work. It's difficult, hard work, backbreaking work, and a lot of those guys, you know, I don't think they get enough credit for just how hard they do work to support their families. Those calloused hands, that's a lifetime of effort, and I don't envy them, but I have a lot of respect for someone that does hard physical labor. And this is the next iteration of that. You can shift that backbreaking work to the robots, and then the humans can do other stuff.
I also know, Joel, my hands are like dishwasher hands.
Yeah,
So there's no manual
good
labor.
for good for typing.
That's
Um,
correct. Even though I'm not good at that either, but there's no manual labor in these hands, I can assure you. But so my philosophy is I actually give back to society by understanding my limitations and hiring those who are good at that,
yeah,
and doing what has to be done. I can lift heavy things, but I'm not going to drill it in, if that makes sense. I
yeah,
can hold it up. So I'm big enough to do that. But it is knowing your limitations. But it's interesting because we speak about that is that people, I actually see once again, it's not a case of, people being industrialized or it end up being like, a honeybee, sort of hive and things like that. I actually see this as amazing opportunities because and it doesn't matter. I was listening to, I don't know whether you listen to the guys, but the AI All In podcast. Great podcast called All In out of the States by four guys who are all VC, unbelievable VC billionaires. But they spoke about AI and they spoke about the fact that now you've actually got people who were in construction, not losing their jobs. They've actually got this skill set of 20 or 30 years worth of opportunity where they're actually being upskilled and put that brain into the technology, and they're now running the floors. They're now actually
yep,
running that. They're not hiring, ex-Google coders who are on $300,000 a year. They're actually upskilling these people with vast experience
yep,
into doing that job, or your 15-year-old colleague,
yep,
as an example. Yeah, who I'm sure gets paid more than just an icy bar at the end of the day.
yeah, yeah. Tim, we pay Tim pretty well.
Yeah.
I think in a practical sense, what something like BotBuilt, the opportunity that it offers is I really think it's something like you could build a house at the same price, but let's say you could build it 10% bigger. And so families have more room. You can have an extra bedroom. You can spread the kids out. That's the sort of opportunity that I look at for it. It doesn't all need to be about cost saving. We
Yeah.
can build. It could be 10% nicer. It could just be a nicer place to live. You can have higher quality finishes. All these sorts of things. Like when you save cost on one line item, you can spend it on another. And so it just doesn't have to be out driving the price down because, a lot of the houses get built these days. I watched a townhouse complex get built when I was in Australia last year. I'd never seen it before. The styrofoam that goes on the front for the cladding. I was like, oh, I didn't know we'd got to this. Like, is this how we make houses affordable? We're covering them in styrofoam. If we can cut some of the cost out of the framing by using robots, can we use better materials in other places? Or yeah, that's often how I pitch it to the builders.
Yeah.
So well, you can compete because you're building nicer houses at the same price point, and it
Yeah.
makes for a better place to live. People would much rather buy your house because they get bigger bedrooms or they get any other value add. It doesn't
Yeah.
always have to be about cutting the overall cost.
What legacy do you hope BotBuilt will leave, both in technology and in society in general?
I think whether we succeed or not, startups are not for the faint-hearted, so there's no guarantee we're going to be around in 12 months. Whether we succeed or not, I hope the legacy is that we proved to construction that robotics works. You can build houses with robots, um, not 3D printed, not any other nonsense. You can build framing, which is an ancient art. We've been building houses with wood for a long time. If BotBuilt can prove to construction and then someone else picks that up and is more successful, at least we're the first ones that really proved it, that you can do it.
All right. We've just brought this in as a new part of our podcast series, but we've got some rapid fire round questions. So I'm going to, the last part of this podcast, Joel, is give you some rapid fire round questions where technology has looked at your bio, AI has, and said, here's 10 questions that we might throw at Joel. And there's a couple of other extra ones in here as well. So first thing you built as a kid.
I remember, we're not religious, but I remember building a nativity set for my nana. We went into dad's work and got all the scrap wood and built, and she's still got it. Every Christmas she gets it out. We built it looks terrible. I'm not proud of it. But we
But
built
she still brings it out every Christmas.
she does. We built a barn. We built a barn so she could put her nativity set in there. Nana Margaret, she's deeply Catholic, very religious. So she loved it. My brother and I built that for her.
Beautiful.
My building only improved after that.
That's good to know. So but the thing is she's still very proud of it though, Joe.
Yeah.
Coffee or energy drinks during a long build?
Coffee. In a
Favorite piece?
mocha pot only. It's the only way to cook it.
There you go. Okay. So lots of it.
Yep.
One thing I've always loved in the US is the batch brew. Always loved just a long black batch brew. Yeah, bottomless cup as well.
Yeah.
So it's favorite piece of tech you own that's not work related.
My favorite piece of tech is a record player that my mum and dad bought when they were dating. It's from the early 1980s, and it sat in our house and was used as a shelf for 30 years. I stole it and restored it. Spent a heap of money restoring it actually, but I love it because it's very manual, and I really like the tactile. I'm not an audiophile, but I like the fact that it's very tactile, and I have to flip the record over. And it's also a very cool piece of tech because it's the in between digital and analog. It's got an infrared remote, but you have to manually set the presets on the radio. You have to turn the dial. And when you would tune the radio, it has a wire that goes up and down the coil to pick up the radio station, but you have an infrared remote to set it. It's a very cool piece of tech. You can turn the volume up and down with the remote and stuff. I'm quite fond of that.
It would have been so advanced in its day, and now it's so retro and cool to have.
Yeah. And then it broke for some reason, and then they just never fixed it. So I blew the. I'm quite fond of that.
So the engineer in Joel came out and fixed it. It's interesting. I do love music, and I've got over 2,000 loved songs in my Spotify list.
Right.
All different genres. I've got, I counted them not so long ago. So I've got 733 CDs still.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm rebuilding my LP collection. It's just that some of those records that I remember buying for $6.50 at 100 Puckle Street down in Mooney Ponds are now costing $75 for Dark Side of the Moon. So
Yeah.
if my mum had not gone and given away my record collection because I was a day late picking them up, I had over 600 albums, and she gave them away. So I'm back up to just over 100 now. So, but geez, they're a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
Still
can
fun
get
though.
lost in a record store and walk out saying, I just spent $700. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. They're a lot more fun. A lot more fun than Spotify. More deliberate as
yeah.
well. I think I like this shift away from tech. Get off your phone, put the record on, listen to it. It's much nicer.
It's what I do in the kitchen every morning is I put on an LP. And
Yep.
I had Neil Diamond's greatest hits on this morning. So,
Nice.
yeah, it's fantastic. So if you weren't in robotics, what industry would you be in?
I thought that I wanted to be in portfolio management.
I know
That,
it actually, do you know AI actually said that you and I have spoken about?
yeah.
It came up on ChatGPT. Joel has spent time with Tony Kofkin speaking about portfolio management and funds management. So there you go. Someone
Yeah.
was listening to our conversation.
Yeah. I'm still very fond. I follow the markets quite a lot. I spend way too much time on my phone reading about financial news. I dabbled in foreign currency trading for a while, made some money, lost some money. So yeah, I think if I wasn't in AI and robotics, I'd be something in the finance industry. I would love to be a portfolio manager.
We'll get there together one.
Yeah.
That's book or podcast that's inspired you recently.
Um, I read not too recently. I've been way too busy to read recently, but I read the story of Endurance, Ernest Shackleton's expedition to the South Pole. If you haven't read that, that is one of the most incredible stories of survival I have ever read. The fact that none of them died, he managed to save every single one of his crew, is one of, I think, the greatest stories of survival in human history.
Stories of
And
survival and leadership.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's an interesting character. Like, he's buried on a whaling station in like the South Atlantic or something. He would have been a terrible guy to be married to, because even after he survived Endurance, he went on more expeditions. Like, he just couldn't stay home. But yeah, incredible story, and it reads like you're there. Like, it's the sort of book that you can't put down, because it's just so incredible that they managed to do that. The other one I would say is The Phantom Major, which is about the founder of the SAS, David Sterling. They made that not great TV series about them in the North African desert. If you love a good war story, The Phantom Major, it reads like fiction, but it's all true. It's incredible. Two very inspiring books.
Yeah. Now, I already have an answer for this one, but I'd like to hear your answer. I know you're a humble man, but who would play you in a movie about your life?
Well, I've managed to convince a few Americans that I'm the other Hemsworth brother.
Those push-ups really
Some
work.
of the I'm certainly not in shape. I'm certainly not in shape to be a Hemsworth brother at the moment. But I don't know. Yeah, we'll say Chris Hemsworth, or the other one. Who's the one with darker hair? Liam.
Liam, yeah. So it's,
Liam, if you're
okay,
watching, mate, I'm open.
but my answer was actually Eric Banner.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So Eric is a good boy. Grew up in Essendon. Went to Essendon Grammar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was telling a mate here about Chopper recently. Actually, so you had to watch Chopper. Great movie.
Yeah. I mean, that's a transformation role. Yeah. Yeah. So for Eric,
So many Australian stars in that as well.
yeah.
No cash here, Chopper. Cash not here. So iconic movie.
Absolutely. What tool or gadget So what's a tool or gadget you always carry with you?
This paper notebook, and you can see
Okay,
it in the
well,
blur.
yep.
I write all my notes on paper. Um, I don't I don't like digital note taking. I especially don't like the AI note taking stuff, which is ironic because I work on an AI product. I have a box of these that I've collected over the years. Every meeting I go to, I take notes about it. I don't go anywhere without this notebook. Everywhere I travel in the world, you can't see with the blur. But yeah, highly recommend a paper notebook. I feel like it makes you much more intentional in a meeting.
I always have to at least write a page in my journal, and I have the beautiful covered journals at home, and I've got several of them complete now. And every morning I just write, and I can only allowed to write something positive. It was only ever on two occasions I caught myself writing something negative in it, and that was during COVID, and my feelings about Dan Andrews.
Yeah.
They weren't very pleasant, but I decided not to scribble them out. I left them
Well,
there.
he's got a statue now, mate. You can go down and pay
Well,
your
we
respects.
not yet. That hasn't been put up yet. So it's
Oh,
but
they haven't built it.
there's a lot of bronze that could be stolen and melted down there, and so it's up by some of the criminals around. If you could instantly master any skill, what would it be?
If I could instantly master any skill, um, I don't know if I would want to instantly master a skill. The joy is in learning it and the challenge. Uh,
Beautiful answer.
I am learning to
That's a
fly.
great engineer's answer, by the way, but that is a magnificent answer.
I'm learning to fly at the moment, and that's expensive and frustrating. So if I could speed that up a bit, that'd be great. But no, the joy is in the learning, right? You don't want to get it for free. Um, yeah, maybe that's too philosophical, but that's my answer.
No, it's a very stylish answer. I think that's wonderful. Okay, final two questions. If you could give your 21-year-old self one sentence of advice, what would it be?
Everything will work out in the end.
Love it. Love it.
I was a very highly strung young man who worried about things a lot, and I really didn't need to.
Beautiful. Last question. Finish your sentence. Success is?
I think success is many things, and in many parts of life. So I think it's okay to say that financial success is being wealthy, because money buys security. Um, for some people, money buys a Lamborghini. I don't want that. I want to be able to provide for my family, and have a roof over our head and not have to worry about that. If someone gets sick, not to have to worry about that. So I think it's very reasonable to say that success is partially financial. Um, if you can do that and also have made a positive contribution to society, that looks like success. And I think later in life, I'm just about to have my first baby in December, but I think success will look something like, until I'm gone, they will come to me with their problems.
Love it.
So something like that.
And I can assure you they grow up very quickly, having a nearly 29-year-old and 26-year-old. They grow up very, very quickly, but they'll always be your babies
Yeah, yeah.
without any doubt. So we rebranded this, Joel. I'm going to finish on this note. We rebranded this podcast Everyday Heroes. And the reason being is because, if we've got 1,000 clients, I've said there's 1,000 different stories and every single person has a story. And I'm going to say this on behalf of a whole bunch of people who I'm sure if they knew they could, they would love to. There's 4,000 Afghan refugees who are now Australians as a result of the work of you and your team. That's probably now multiplied to 8 to 10,000 in relation to, them having children, and they've actually, got careers now and done things because of that work. So, on behalf of them, I'll just actually love to say that you are definitely one of those, a story that you've shared. So gracefully shared with all of our listeners today. People will know of you at the moment, say at BotBuilt, won't necessarily know of the real story of Joel Bell, and you are definitely a everyday hero that somebody would walk past in the street and not have a clue of the amazing stuff that you have done for so many people around the world today. So I'd like to thank you on their behalf.
I appreciate it, Tony. And I'm not trying to be humble, but I would definitely say that I was a small part of a very big team. It was a privilege to be part of that team. There are people that did much more than I did, who will remain thankless. Like many veterans, they do all sorts of things that people will never know about. And so, if anyone listening does know someone who served, a thank you goes a long way, because it's a tough life. And yeah, especially if you know someone who was there during the evacuation of Kabul, that was especially the guys that went to Kabul, that were on the ground there. That wasn't me, and uh, they do they deserve all the gratitude in the world, for what they did for Australia during that. Um, but yeah, I appreciate the thanks. But I was a small part of a big team. I'm proud to be a part of that team.
Wonderful. Joel, thank you for your time today. I shall let you get back to your family.
Thanks very much, Tony. I appreciate the chat.
Thanks a lot, Joel.
Thanks, mate.
The Kofkin Bond podcast is a product from Kofkin Bond Company, which we are an authorized representative of Count Financial. All information in this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional, finance, legal, or tax advice. The hosts of the Kofkin Bond podcast are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Before making any financial decision, you should read the product disclosure statement and, if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. Do not take financial advice from the podcast. For more information, head to the disclaimer page on the Kofkin Bond website, or you can find resources on the ASIC website and find a registered financial professional near you. In the spirit of reconciliation, Kofkin Bond Co. and the hosts of the Kofkin Bond podcast acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today.